All right, we'll make a start. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to Cyber and Risk, a Boardroom Imperative. So my name is Gemma Wilkes. I'm head of the Met practice at Moon Executive Search, and I'm delighted to co-host today's session alongside our partners at Ashfords LLP and the Southwest Cyber Security Cluster. This event is designed for board members, trustees and senior leaders who want clarity on why cyber and risk is not just an IT issue, but a critical business responsibility. Over the next 90 minutes, we'll explore how to strengthen organisational resilience, prepare for the unexpected and lead with confidence in a digital world. Here's how the session's going to run. So we'll start with a keynote from Jessica Figueres, who is an experienced non-exec director and cyber leader, and she's going to talk about the governance imperative. Then we have got Jeff Revel, 10 years supporting the cyber sector in the Southwest, with a focus on business protection and also an SME business owner and cyber innovator. We've got Sam, who's at the Regional Cyber Crime Unit, whose role is to guide and educate businesses to be more resilient and respond when that resilience fails. And we've got David Varney, who will support the discussion in the context of law and governance, especially in a regulated business. Together, we're going to cover practical steps to prepare, respond, and recover. Finally, Vanessa Moon, founding director of Moon Executive Search, will close the session with some key reflections and next steps. So a few housekeeping rules before we start. The session is being recorded and will be shared appropriately after the event. Please keep your microphones muted unless you're invited to speak. For the questions, use the Q&A box throughout the session, which will be monitored, and I'll bring questions into the discussion. If you'd like to ask a question live during the panel, please do raise your hand and I can come round to you. There is also a general chat for any technical issues or relevant comments, and Fran Brandy from Ashfords is monitoring that throughout the session. Finally, this is a collaborative space. Please keep questions focused, avoid sales pitches. Our goal is to share insight and equip you with actionable steps. Right, let's get going. Jessica, over to you.
Hi, thanks so much, Gemma. It's great to be here. Hello, so I'm director and co-founder of an organisation called CXB, Cyber Governance for Boards. We're a non-profit that supports board members to improve their oversight of cybersecurity in their organisation. I'm also a non-executive director, currently at the University of Westminster. I was past vice chair of the UK Cybersecurity Council, also past chair of NCT, and also been chief executive for cybersecurity consultancy. So if we could move on to the next slide. Okay, so why is cybersecurity the board's responsibility? I think this is something we hear all the time now, that it is the board's responsibility. But you know, when it comes to it, almost everything is the board's responsibility, isn't it? And if you're actually a board member yourself, you know, you're no doubt reflecting on all of the very, very many topics that end up on your desk. Everybody in the organisation wants a bit of your time. Everybody in the organisation wants you to know that what they do personally is the most important thing you need to think about. So I want this to be sort of something that we all really, really understand, not just something we say to be kind of motherhood and apple pie. It's very important. So next slide, please. So you'll have seen all of the scary headlines. I don't need to repeat here. But you know, clearly there are cases in which you know, the existence, the survival of the organisation is in play, unfortunately. And so, you know, you might have seen, for example, this awful story about this 158-year UK logistics firm, which unfortunately shut down. It simply did not have the financial strength to survive the ransomware attack. But I think, you know, what's more interesting almost is how cybersecurity attacks and issues can contribute and just weaken your organisation in substantial ways. So, for example, you'll have seen the story about the nursery, you know, where it's very sensitive data and all these children were stolen. You know, that kind of that speaks to how these cyber attacks can really affect the mission of what we do. And even if it's not existential, it's absolutely a board level kind of issue. And a law firm which fell into insolvency. Okay, so there it wasn't the case that there was a critical cyber attack, that was the size of Marks and Spencer's. It was the fact that it was just a contributing factor to an organisation which is already struggling a little bit. So, particularly if your organisation is not absolutely awash with cash and has a really, really good level of profitability, then cybersecurity issues can be part of what just weakens the organization. So you do not want this to happen. Next slide, please. And there are other voices coming in too now. Government absolutely has business leaders and board members in its sight, has started to do quite unprecedented things now. Clearly, government sees the actual threat, has privy to information which does not make it into the news, and what government is seeing is not reassuring at all. We're not seeing a picture that's getting any better. It certainly seems to be getting worse. And so government now is starting to reach out directly to board members. So this was a letter that was sent to the CEOs and chairs of the FTSE 350. However, government is looking at board responsibility right across the piece. There's increasing regulation now across a growing number of sectors, which does require the board to be very, very actively involved in cybersecurity, and we can only expect this to grow. So all sorts of sectors which are not now covered by regulation will start to be brought into the scope. So this is happening too. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is an underappreciated factor, I think. So these are some of the headlines that we saw around the M&S attack. Now, what's interesting here is not necessarily the fact that it was M&S and it was such an eye-catching attack. We all saw it on the news and some really, really big figures here. Okay, what I find really interesting here was the fact that it's this link between the CEO's pay and that being a link to the attack. So this story was in the FT, it was in the Times, it was in the Guardian, it was on the BBC, it was absolutely everywhere, and it was quite prominent. And the subtext here was, well, I mean, they were paying their CEO very handsomely, and then they got attacked. There was a link to, there were questions being asked about had the board, been happily kind of allocating resources to executive pay when they should have been investing in cybersecurity. And this is a line I think we're going to see more and more now. There is this direct connection being drawn between the behaviour, the decisions, and the choices that boards make, and the outcome. I think it's unfair, actually. As if a board can only ever kind of prioritise cybersecurity, it has to prioritise lots of things. But we can expect stakeholders to ask more and more these kind of questions, these difficult questions about board priorities. So whether we like it or not, it shows that this is a board issue because we're going to be held accountable, whatever. Okay, next slide, please. So what is stopping boards from engaging more directly? Well, I first should say that there is a huge amount of difference between different boards here in terms of how involved they are with cybersecurity. And I see some boards which are really quite mature, which have a lot of conversations about cybersecurity, exercise good governance, have good relationships with their technical staff, are having mature conversations about things like risk appetite, for example, are linking cybersecurity to their strategy. And there are other boards which never have any conversations about cybersecurity. And don't feel particularly comfortable. So what makes the difference? Well, could we have sorry, the next but two slides on, please? I'm just going to skip over the next one. That one, yeah, that's it. Thank you. Okay, so this to me is what a kind of a board maturity journey looks like. Because the fact is that cybersecurity wasn't seen as as a topic for most boards very, very recently. You know, it was something that the IT department did and the board didn't really get involved with. So we need to go on a journey. Everybody is expecting the boards to become engaged. But the challenges for most boards is that, you know, they don't necessarily know what good looks like. And so, you know, the least mature board here is the avoidance board. So down on the bottom left-hand corner here. This is a board which is not interested in cybersecurity. It doesn't provide enough financial resource. It's not prepared to invest in the problem, and it delegates. It delegates oversight to executives. It says it's not our issue. This stuff is very techy. It's very detailed. You know, it's one for the IT department. You manage it. Okay, so we clearly need to move on from that. And lots of boards now understand that they should at least be talking about cybersecurity. But where do they go next? Well, typically we see, you know, they move into one of two places. One is they become very, very engaged, but they're not very, very supportive. So this is the micromanaging board. And this is often where you might have one or two board members who are interested in cybersecurity, you know, think they know about it, maybe do have some technical expertise. But it's a board that has forgotten that the role of the board is to delegate its oversight and governance. The board doesn't do it itself. A micromanaging board is going to be really detailed focus and not very strategic. It's going to be reactive. So every news piece, they're going to be beating up the IT department and saying, you know, well, what happened here? Do we have this problem? You know, coming in with vendors that, you know, they've just been pitched by and suggesting ideas. You can often get, unfortunately, a kind of blame culture, and this is all too common in cybersecurity, and it's a real problem. And the idea here is that if something's gone wrong, it's somebody's fault and somebody needs to get fired. So really, really common, unfortunately. So this is a board which is kind of on cybersecurity, but it is not taking a constructive approach. It is trying to replace the work of its technical teams. It's not managing them. It's not overseeing. It's not allowing them to build the confidence and capability they need. It's not helping to bolster the organisation. Okay, so in other direction, you know, some boards start off avoidant and they know they need to do more, and so they become much more supportive, but not particularly engaged. So this is the positive but passive board on the bottom right-hand corner. And this is a board which doesn't have any of that kind of blame culture, any of that negativity we saw before. It's much more positive, much more supportive, but it's not really fulfilling its duty of oversight. So any proposal that's coming from technical teams, it's saying, yes, absolutely, yeah, blank checkbook, not really asking any questions, not asking, you know, why are we proposing to invest money in this and not that? You know, explain your choices here. It's not really giving support for deeper change, because you often do have issues with an organisation where there are barriers and blockers in other parts of the organisation, and the board is not supporting the resolution of those. And it's operating what I call trust-based governance. And what this means is simply if someone comes to present to the board, let's say a CTO, and the board says, he seems like a very credible chap, you know, liked him, he spoke well to us, I think he knows what he's doing, let's let him get on with it. You know, so that's nice. It's nice, but it's not enough. Okay, so where are we trying to get to? What does the responsible board look like? It's a board that it operates assurance-based governance. So it says, yes, I'll share the slides, absolutely. So this is a board that says, great, thank you for coming to talk to us. You know, you seem like a very nice and a very credible chap. And can you tell us more about this? What assurance can you give us? Can you, have we had any external eyes on this? Is there a standard that we need to be meeting? Give us some evidence. This board is offering informed challenge and support. That does not mean that it needs to be technically expert. In fact, actually having technical experts on your board can be a bit counterproductive sometimes, because you get this issue then that they're trying to step in and be the security department rather than overseeing. But challenge and support. What more do you need from us? What more could we be doing? If you had infinite budget, what would you spend it on and why? What should be our priority? It leads a positive security culture. So rather than looking to blame when something goes wrong, it's offering support. What can we do better next time? Looking to learn lessons. Okay, so that's where we're heading. Now, could we go back one slide, please? Okay, so why aren't boards doing that now? Right where we are right now, it's that your typical board has a kind of set of issues which are really common, and absolutely number one here is this lack of expertise and confidence. And this is an issue you don't find in other areas that a board has to manage. So for example, if you look at finance and accounting, really common for your average board to have at least one accountant, and often several. And even for the non-accountants on your typical board, the way that that financial reporting works, financial management, is such a mature space. All boards have years and years of experience of overseeing finance. You do not have that with cybersecurity. Almost certainly you don't have technical expertise on the board. Even if you do have technical expertise, that person does not necessarily know about how to be a good board member. Again, they may be looking to sort of replace the expertise of the technical teams rather than actually exercise that governance and oversight. Typically what you get at a board is a lot of people who are afraid even to ask questions because they are afraid they're going to look silly. Really common for senior people to have asked a question of someone technical and been made to feel that that was a stupid question to ask, or just didn't understand what they were told. So there's a real issue there in unwillingness to talk about stuff because nobody wants to look silly. And this sounds like a silly question, a silly problem, and in some ways it is, but this is very real. It's the number one blocker. I guess the flip side of that is technical teams may not communicate well. Really common. So often you will get two people that really want to understand each other and just find it very hard to share a common language. Boards often don't know what questions to ask. They literally do not know where to start. And then the upshot of all of these communication difficulties is that you often get a gap. So technical teams are very focused on technical risks, things that could happen to systems, things that could go wrong. But what does that mean in terms of business risk? So what if somebody breaks into this particular system or this particular server? What is the business impact of that happening? What is our organization not able to do? What is going to happen? And very often this stuff is not spelt out at all. It doesn't come to the board at all. And you have a piece of work there that is not done. Nobody's done that work. The technical teams haven't done it. The board hasn't done it. And so when we don't actually know the business impact, we don't know how much it's likely to cost us. We don't know how much disruption it's likely to inflict on the business. Well, then that's a recipe, isn't it, for underinvestment? Because how can you respond to a risk if you don't know what the size of it is? Okay, and then you get kind of cultural, interpersonal issues, which are really common as well. And you often get conflicting business priorities. And this is particularly the case for organizations which are doing a lot of kind of digital service delivery. Very often the case that teams are really focused on building as quickly as possible, launching new services, getting things out to market. Cybersecurity is seen as a bit of a blocker. It's seen as something that will slow things down. It will make them more expensive. And so then when all of those teams are reporting up to a CTO, you may well have a CTO who is having to oversee cybersecurity as well as digital delivery. And then what happens with these conflicts? Well, the CTO has to kind of resolve that tension themselves, don't they? Very often, the decision is not taken to the board. The board is not asked, would you rather have this out 3 months earlier, or would you rather make sure that we've really kind of kicked the tires on cyber risk? That is a strategic question, but mostly it doesn't come to the board. It will be left to the CTO or similar. And the CTO will just use, the kind of prevalent mood music to decide which way he or she is going to jump, right? And if the board is very preoccupied with time to market revenue, which most boards are, then that CTO is going to know that they're going to go with the 3 months quicker option. They're not going to go with the secure option. So these kind of conflicts are really, really common. They come up in all sorts of other areas. Another one I would mention is mergers and acquisitions. If you're looking to buy a company, for example. So with this one, you have to remember that what you're buying is not just the business, you're buying all of their risks as well. How much cyber due diligence is going to be done? Do you really know what risk you're taking on when making that acquisition? So the whole field of cyber due diligence is a very new one, actually, and you will be amazed at how much M&A goes on without any consideration. So again, that's a kind of business priority conflict. And we have to think about what messages is the board sending to executives in terms of its priorities, what it rewards, what kind of behaviours, what sort of things does it reward. Very, very often a board will reward executives for painting a reassuring picture, certainly about cybersecurity. So often the question that gets asked is, are we secure? And yes, please let the answer be yes. It's not a helpful question. So let's skip on a bit and think about, we could go 2 slides on. That's it. Okay. So how should a board get started with cyber governance? Okay, I've got kind of just 3 main points to make here. Number 1 is you do not need to be an expert. As I've said, sometimes actually having technical expertise at the board can be a bit of a problem, and it makes everybody else sort of sit back and delegate to them. So you don't need to be an expert. There's really, really great government guidance out there now, the Cyber Governance Code of Practice, which is aimed at boards, and what that does is it helps you understand what good looks like. So you don't need to know now what good looks like. You can just follow the code of practice and get to know your technical team, whoever that is, whether it's big, small, whether it's outsourced to a supplier. Understand who they are and start asking questions. Just ask any questions. Don't ask, are we secure? Please try to ask open questions which prompt more kind of unstructured conversations. Try to have conversations so that will help you learn over time, and make it an ongoing one. You need to build that relationship, build those relationships with your technical team, help them understand your priorities. You need to understand what they're worried about. So number 2, please stop expecting to hear good news. Good news is not helpful with cybersecurity. You need to reward your team for giving you facts and information, not false reassurance. Okay, so questions like, are we secure? Not helpful. There's no binary with cybersecurity. When it comes to it, nobody is secure. That's the place to start, really. But what we want to understand is, what can we do today that will put us in a bit of a better position than we were in yesterday? That's really what we're looking for. And finally, on a very practical level, think when, not if. Now we're past the realm of if there was a cyber attack. We all have to think now that we will be hit at some point. If we're lucky, we've got a couple of years. If we're unlucky, it'll be tomorrow. Okay, so if we're thinking when we're attacked rather than if, what would we do? Well, we would be thinking much more about how could we respond and recover from an incident, wouldn't we? So the bad guys are already in the building. What can we do now? So plan actively for an incident. Work with your team about your incident response plan. Think very carefully about recovery, how you could recover. If you haven't already looked at cyber insurance, do please look at cyber insurance. The market seems to be functioning really well. Brokers can also be very, very helpful actually in helping you to understand what your security posture is actually, and helping you to understand some of the weak points. So last slide, please. Well, That's it. Yeah, so I also wanted to say, CXB, we're here for you. If you're a board member just getting started with your cyber governance journey, or in fact, if you're further down the track. So we were set up for you. So CXB was set up by 4 of us, non-executive directors. We were really worried to see a real lack of board engagement with cybersecurity. This was back in 2023. We thought that something ought to be done about it, and we realised that it ought to be us. So we're a peer-led forum by Neds for Neds. We run free events all the time just for board members to come and talk in confidence about different issues, and we're starting to do formal training as well. So do drop us a line if you'd like to know more. And that's it from me.
Lovely, thank you, Jess. Thank you very much. So over to our panel. I don't know if you want to go around, starting maybe with Jeff, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, yes, thank you. So Jeff Revel, I'm one of the directors of the Southwest Cybersecurity Cluster, have been for 10 years. We just literally started as a not-for-profit to help businesses understand how to become more resilient, because a lot of people didn't understand the simple things they could do. But I'm also a cyber innovator. I've won 2 innovation awards in that context, and therefore I run micro businesses. So clearly, I would say that I have some idea how to set up a small business to be resilient, and I'm hopefully going to help you with that.
Lovely, thank you. And obviously we've heard from Jessica. Sam?
Good morning. Yes, Sam, I'm a Cyber Protect and Prepare Officer with the South West Regional Cybercrime Unit. My job is talking to organisations about how they can protect themselves from cybercrime, what the current threat looks like, and how they can prepare themselves.
Lovely, thank you. And David?
Morning all, I'm David Varney. I'm a partner in the technology and data team at Ashfords. On cybersecurity, we advise clients on best practice and regulatory guidance ahead of any incidents, and also post-incident breach response support.
Lovely, thank you. Next slide, thanks, Fran. Thank you. So I think this one, Sam, is over to you.
Thank you very much. So this slide shows figures taken from the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology's 2025 Cyber Breaches Survey. Seeing recent news headlines, it's really easy to think that cyber attacks only impact large corporations and that criminals would have no interest in small companies, especially here in the Southwest. However, in my experience, it's most cyber incidents are not targeted at all, but opportunistic. Criminals will just see a weakness, a vulnerability, some breached credentials, and they'll just have a go. On a monthly basis, I deal with small, medium and large organisations across Southwest whose businesses have been impacted by cybercrime. And it's not necessarily always huge ransomwares like we see in the news all the time. It can be any attacks from phishing emails to data breaches, supply chain attacks, and even account compromises, just to name a few. All of these will have some impact on that organisation, and the effects can range from business downtime, reputational damage, or costs associated with bringing the expertise to fix the problem. This is why cybersecurity is not just an IT problem. When it goes wrong, it's the whole organisation that can be impacted, not just the IT team. I briefly mentioned supply chain attacks there, and these are instances where someone in your supply chain becomes a victim to a cyber incident and then that impacts you. That impact could be that they can no longer supply a vital resource into your business, impacting your operations, or it could be that the attacker is able to move laterally into your organisation directly. We've seen an increase in these attacks over the past few years as criminals realise that they might not be able to compromise the intended target, who is likely to be a large organisation or one of national importance, but they may be able to target smaller companies who supply into them. We recently were contacted by a company headquartered in the Southwest who had lost nearly £500,000 due to a cyber attack. When we did the investigation, it was actually highlighted that it was a supplier that actually had become compromised, and the criminal was then able to leverage that to get that £500,000 out of the company. Fortunately, we did a very successful investigation and the guy was eventually identified and is now serving time, and we managed to recover that £500,000 as well. The final table on the bottom there highlights how often organisations are seeing attacks. Now, this could be that they are repeatedly being targeted following an incident, or it could simply be that they're regularly fending off a variety of attacks, which is the reality for most organisations. The vast majority of organisations in the UK rely on information, data and digital technology to create value, and cybersecurity ensures organisations can operate effectively in our increasingly online world. Link this with the frequency of attacks we can see here, and this is why cybersecurity needs to be considered at the board level. Now, as Jess mentioned, this doesn't mean that the board needs to be a technical expert, but they do need to know enough about cybersecurity to have a constructive discussion with key staff so that they can be confident cyber risk is being appropriately managed, like all other risks within your organisation. So I'd like to hand over now to maybe Jeff to see if he has any further comments on this slide.
Yeah, I think the thing here in the Southwest is that we are preponderance of SMEs, and so when we're thinking about risk, we need to be thinking about the fact that our suppliers are a risk and we are a risk to our customers. And as this risk profile gets better understood, we're much more likely to see our customers asking us what we're doing to mitigate the risks to them. And I think that's part of the risk profile that we need to be getting our head around, as no matter how small your business is, we've all got customers, we've all got suppliers.
Next slide, please, Fran.
Thank you. So this slide takes a closer look at what is actually going on here in the Southwest. And it also shows some of the impacts that cyber attacks are having on organisations within the last 12 months. So firstly, it might look quite surprising that we've only had 162 cyber-dependent crimes reported into law enforcement here in the Southwest over that 12-month period. Now, that does increase to 1,067 if we include cyber-enabled crimes, which are sort of traditional crimes that now happen online as well, such as some fraud, stalking, malicious communications. Now, the real problem with these figures is that we know organisations are reluctant to report cybercrime into law enforcement, and it's thought that only 10% ever gets reported in. Now, this is mainly due to misconceptions such as the police can't help with cybercrime, or the police would go running to the ICO and report you there, or even that cybercrime is not a real crime. But if your business was broken into tomorrow, you'd probably call the police. So why wouldn't we do this if our digital assets are broken into or stolen? The average cost of an impactful cybercrime is around £3,500 per breach. But again, there are questions around this figure and how often the true cost of cybercrime is difficult to quantify. When we see a cybercrime reported into us, they normally report what money has been lost already. But this doesn't include ongoing costs such as loss of business, spending to respond and recover to an attack, or should you choose to pay the ransom. A recent report from KPMG suggests that the total cost of cybercrime here in the UK is 14.7 billion, which may be more in line with what you expect having seen some of the recent headlines. But why does any of this matter? Cyber attacks can happen to anyone, anytime. It's not a case of if it's going to happen, it's when. And that's why we need all organisations of all sizes and sectors across the UK to take this seriously. Referring back to the 2025 Cyber Breaches Survey, only 27% of organisations have cybersecurity at a board level responsibility, and this is actually a decline from 38% in 2021. So my plea is, this is happening, it's happening to everybody, everywhere, so please take it seriously and take it on as a risk like you would any other risk in your organisation.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, you know, the way people think that hackers think about how and who they're going to attack, and they really actually don't. They have automated tools and technologies that just go around and hunt across the internet for weaknesses, and they attack those weaknesses, and they don't care who the weakness is within. It just happens automatically. There's a lot of automation that goes on behind the scenes. They even have, you know, black hat service providers who will do it for you if you want it done. So that's the way they're thinking, they're operating. They're not going after you, they're just going after anybody who's weak, who could open up an opportunity for a financial gain. And so, you know, don't think about it as cyber risk mitigation as I'm going to stop them attacking me. What you're going to do is make it so that those automated door openers are closed to them, and they're going to look elsewhere, and they will automatically look elsewhere. It's not that they will suddenly try harder to attack you. Their automated systems will just automatically look elsewhere. So it's all about being the fastest runner in the jungle when the lion's chasing, right? You know, they're going to catch somebody, but just make sure it's not you.
Guess you have an analogy there, Jeff, to draw on Sam's area is like putting a burglar alarm on your house makes next door's house more attractive.
Yeah.
From my perspective here, It's just worth saying as well that there's a combination of Companies Act and regulations in the new cyber bill, which mean that boards need to think now, obviously, about cyber risk assessments, supply chain assurance, as we spoke about, readiness and reporting plans, and ensuring minimal rights of access. So the regulators are getting a sharper toolkit to basically look into and support, I suppose, businesses that aren't taking cyber security responsibilities as seriously as the regulators would like.
Lovely. Next slide. Thanks, Fran. So the cash management corollary, no cash means no business, no digital means no business. So all SME leaders have a strong focus on cash, and you understand how that works, how that manages within your business, often in preference the balance sheets. And certainly when it comes to day-to-day business, you know, it's that importance, isn't it? It's what keeps you going. Your cyber posture should get the same level of day-to-day attention. So we use cash management as a corollary of good cyber risk management. So you already know all this stuff from how you manage your cash and how you manage your finances, but it's just a case of having that same viewpoint when you're looking at cyber. Next slide, please, Fran. Jeff and Jessica, as business leaders, I think you're going to help us understand this chronology.
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. So this was a thought was having, you know, the SME is a business that tends to focus on cash much more than balance sheet. And that's how it survives and how it makes its money. It's kind of the central point of thought at the board level very often, or just at the executive leadership level. What I'm here to say is that as somebody who does understand cyber and does run a business, is there are absolute corollaries between cash and cyber. And the way that you think and operate about managing your cash, you already know about how to manage risk in cyber. It's the same structures, the same approach, the same models. It isn't different, it isn't scary. Stuff you know can be applied across the board. So that's what I'd like to say on that, and that's how we're going to take the rest of this presentation, is to kind of give those cash-based corollaries to the cyber perspective for risk. Jessica? Anything to add?
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess one thing to think about here is there are some aspects of financial management which do translate really well over. And one is with financial management, we never just take things on trust, do we? You're always going to be thinking about what controls we have in place to make sure that you can survive even if you inadvertently hired a bookkeeper who couldn't be trusted, you know. And so think about that as well with cybersecurity. Cybersecurity, unfortunately, requires us to start to manage our digital businesses in very fundamentally different ways. Digital technologies were not invented in a trustless world, unfortunately. The web, the internet were kind of built and conceived in an era which arguably was very idealistic, actually. And a lot of the time, trust was not kind of built into the actual protocols of the internet. And we're trying to almost kind of reverse engineer now that we're starting to realize that we've inadvertently connected our businesses to the world's kind of criminals and thugs, unfortunately. So we have to operate now under the assumption that our digital businesses are kind of open many ways to the bad guys. So we have to think about we can't just operate under the assumption that everybody in the network is on our side. We have to move to what we call zero trust environment.
We've had a question in, Jeff. Sarah's asked, what is a black hat service provider?
Yeah, I responded in the chat. My apologies. I try to sort of slap my own wrist if I use terms that are cyber related, but I fell into my own trap. It's a term that defines the nature of a hacker. There are good hackers out there whose job it is to help you understand the weaknesses in your system. They're called white hat. Black hat are basically the naughty guys who are out there with criminal intent. And what we're seeing is that they are banding together and offering their criminal services as a cyber attack tool chain. You know, we're the experts on hacking and you can hire us to go hack. And they're not necessarily attacking any specific organization. They're just hiring their technical expertise to set up these bots and to initiate a criminal enterprise using cyber attacks.
Maybe also worth talking briefly, Jeff, about ransomware as a service, in that the people that find the vulnerability will likely not be the people that demand a ransom for exploiting that vulnerability.
Yeah, the ransomware world has got very sophisticated, and there are organizations that literally, it is exactly that, ransomware as a service. You pay them a fee, and they'll set up a ransomware system for you, and you take, you know, it's like almost like a franchising. They'll take they'll execute the ransomware for you, but you're the one running the ransomware activity, and that's available on what's called the dark web, which is the part of the web that tries to keep itself generally inaccessible except to those that understand how to connect into it. So they're getting quite sophisticated out there, but a lot of it is still effectively automation. Move to the next slide, Gemma.
Yes, please. Yeah, next slide. Thanks, Fran.
Gemma, you were going to talk to this one, I think. Oh no, this is us. Sorry, my apologies.
Sorry, this is you.
No, this is me. My apologies. So, yeah, let's start walking through this corollary, this concept that cash and cyber are basically the same thing. And Jessica's largely set this one up. It starts with trust. And when you select your bank, you know, you connect with a bank and put your money into a bank that was robbed yesterday, right? You put it in with one that you feel, you know, has good services, good support, provides the trust that you expect. Now that trust is implicit now. That's one thing that is different with banks, in as much that they're held very tightly to account with regulatory structures. The same is not true of the IT organizations that you get. That's down to you to determine how to manage those either IT or cyber hires, and select them with your trust hat on to think through, are these guys, you know, can they answer simple questions about how they're going to manage the system for me and be trustworthy in doing so? Have they taken on appropriate credentials? How do they execute those credentials? That sort of thing. So the same way that you are thinking about selecting your bank for your cash, you know, be careful about where you're putting your trust in your hires and cyber team, because they quite literally have the keys to the digital kingdom. They are capable of accessing everything everywhere because they have to be able to do so in order to be able to protect and support your systems. So when you understand that they literally have access to all the cash, you need to think about how you are managing them and the trust that you're putting in them and the assurances that you've obtained from them, in order to make sure that you've set that first baseline for managing your business. Jessica, add to that?
So the so managed service providers are, as you've noted, Jeff, currently unregulated in terms of cybersecurity. So that's worth keeping in mind. However, the situation is changing. So last week, government introduced legislation into Parliament that will bring managed service providers into scope of the existing cybersecurity regulations. So to me, this is a really, really good thing. It means that those MSPs will have to they will have to report regularly on their compliance using the CAF standard, which is the kind of gold standard in the UK. It means that they will have to report incidents, for example. There'll be a lot of transparency, so that's all great. However, that is not in place today, unfortunately. So in the meantime, there are a few things I guess you can ask to see as assurance from your provider. You can ask to see what standards and accreditations they comply with. You want to see the basics like obviously cyber essentials. You'll want to see ISO 27001. You might also want to see things like, are they using NIST? Are they using the CAF? If they are already looking to those kind of gold standard frameworks that are going to be imposing them anyway, that's a really, really good sign. And, you know, you want to see that this is an area of active interest for them. And if they're a managed service provider that actually also provides managed security services, that's probably a good sign that they're a bit more capable than the rest. And you might want to ask some common sense questions about, for example, how they manage these issues around trust and permissions with the people that work on the service. Ask some questions that you might ask about your finance department, for example. Who actually has access to our data? What do they have access to do? What protections do you have in place to make sure they cannot misuse my data? You know, what do you do? Ask them to give you chapter and verse on their policies. And if they're not willing to enter into that conversation, you know, you can draw your own conclusions.
In a keynote speech, Jessica spoke about due diligence in the context of cybersecurity, and this is another great example. Making sure that diligence is carried out into your supply chain, those MSPs, managed service providers, making sure that they're exhibiting best practice, have appropriate security baselines, report to you in respect of any instance or maybe near misses. The fact that you are subcontracting elements of your IT does not remove you from accountability or liability. You're still responsible for those, particularly in the eyes of regulators and insurers.
Yeah.
And your customers as well, more importantly.
Indeed. Okay, next slide. So in fact, you touched on this one, I think, Jessica. You know, in the same way that when you're managing your cash, you think carefully within your organization, who has got access rights to the bank, right? Who has visibility, who can look at the bank account and who can actually draw upon the bank account. When you're thinking about your systems inside your business, you need to start thinking about, you know, the valuable assets that you have. Some data is not valuable necessarily, and some data is highly sensitive, and if it was released into the public domain or obtained by a hacker, would, you know, like the kiddo example, if you lose that, that's your credibility, your basis of a business. They, you know, the fundamentals, the trust of your business. So knowing who it is you have to trust within your organization with access rights to what data. So it kind of gets you starting to think about what information do we have and how sensitive is it? And if we were to lose it, what would happen to our business? So you start thinking a little bit about that. And I'm not talking about a full data audit, but just it's fairly implicit sometimes. It might just be your customer data, right? Or it could be their bank account details, or it could be, you know, their child data, or it could be a passport copy. You know, are you keeping those longer than you need to? You know, do they stay in the bank? Should they stay in the bank, or should they be deleted sooner rather than later once you've correlated and validated somebody's identity, for example? So you've got to start thinking about the information access rights you have in your system. This is getting a bit detailed, but this is more for SMEs. This is probably a little bit low level, as Jessica would probably say, for average board levels. But validating that somebody somewhere has clarity on this and that they understand what data, what access, is a kind of a first stepping stone, in the same way as you would have that clarity around your bank and your access rights and controls over that. Jessica?
Yeah, not much to add, really.
David?
Yeah, I think that you spoke about access rights, Jeff, and excessive access permissions are now seen as not just poor practice, I guess, but a legal vulnerability. UK GDPR requires data minimization, and the cyber bill that Jessica referred to earlier came through Parliament last week, reinforces operational minimization, I guess. So businesses must show their restricted access to what's required only for the business function. You spoke about leaving money in the bank. So if someone gets phished, say, and the attacker was able to access an entire database when that person didn't have admin rights, for example, I guess that would be seen as a kind of cyber governance failure, maybe a breach of legal obligations. So minimizing access in this respect isn't just optional anymore, I suppose. It's part of an appropriate defence posture and increasingly being seen as something that's with importance by the regulatory bodies in your particular areas.
Yeah. Sam, jump in if you've got anything you want to add to that. I mean,
Yeah.
from an attack vector point of view, it's one of the primary ones, right?
Absolutely. So over 90% of all the cyber attacks we see have phishing or smishing or vishing, so either emails, text messages, or phone calls of malicious communication, and that's sort of your initial access point. And yes, it might escalate to these big scary ransomware attacks we see, or it might just be access into a database that we discussed, but that tends to be the starting point. For a lot of organizations we see where they suffer data breaches, there's often an assumption that people in seniority in organizations have to have access to everything. It's their right, it's their business, they have to. But actually, we're sort of saying just have yourself access to the things you need to use day to day. And then you might have special protected accounts that have admin rights to things that can just be used as and when they need to be used, but they certainly shouldn't be used on a regular basis. And nobody should have access to everything on a network ever.
Sam, have you seen anything professionally around AI-enabled video deepfake calls?
Yeah, so obviously there's been a couple of attacks in the news where certainly not in the UK yet. We've not seen anything in the Southwest yet. We're certainly something we're thinking about. So we're just talking to businesses about, keep an eye out for it, make sure that your staff are aware of these sorts of things as well, and just verify, always verify. It doesn't matter who they say they are. Hang up the phone, stop that call, and verify using a means that you know and trust to check that that person is who they say they are.
I was speaking with a finance director at international business a couple of weeks ago, who said he'd received a video call from his MD, and was asking for payment of money, and the call was legitimate. It was all tracked through, but something aroused his suspicions. So he asked the hacker effectively to the question around what book did we speak about last week? A kind of personal verification question, which obviously led to the call being terminated immediately, but he successfully stopped the attack.
Yeah.
We've actually got, so the Southwest Cybersecurity Cluster runs a monthly event for the cyber community to update them on the latest attack vectors and mechanisms, and we got a speaker in January who's going to be talking about AI deepfakes and their use in cyber attacks. I mean, just touching on AI now, you brought it up. It's worth mentioning I was out on a panel with NCSC about 6 months ago, talking about AI and cyber. Does it change the game? And at the moment, what we haven't seen is any change or new types of what we call attack vectors. In other words, new methods of attack. We haven't seen any new methods of attack. What we see with AI is what you see everywhere with AI is that they can go deeper, they can go wider, and they can move faster. And that's kind of one of the things, again, going on this, trust verification thing on the previous slide, is talk to your provider about their awareness of that acceleration and what they're putting in place, because they will need to automate their defenses in the same way as the attacks are being automated. And they're going to need to think about the fact that if that data is hacked, the AI can go and process it very, very quickly and suck out the really useful stuff that can sell for maximum value really quickly, which might have taken days or weeks before, can now be done in seconds by AI. So that's that deep sort of version of the attack. So the response mechanisms that when you're thinking about it, what we're looking forward to, and it's not today, but it's happening, it's moving forward, is that the nature of the attack is deeper, faster, and more effective and broader. Should we move on to the next slide? So when we're trying to say understanding the risk, then you need to know your cyber posture, and you need to know your supplier and customers' cyber posture in the same way that when you're doing your cash flow forecasting, you look at your suppliers and you say, are they going to pay on time, or do I have to plan for them to probably not pay on time? Are they going to purchase more, or are they going to purchase less? You're always looking at your forecast. The point about understanding cyber risk is that it's a bit like managing your cash flow. It's something you have to do on a daily or weekly or certainly monthly basis, depending on the size of your business and your exposure on cash. But whatever it is, you need to be doing it on a very regular basis. It's not something you just plan once for the year and then don't really look at it, right? The circumstances in the market, like we just talked about AI, are changing continuously. And with that in mind, you need to be continuously keeping an eye on whether or not you have planned for your cash flow or the change in the cyber risk that's out there, because it's continuously, and it's a very fast-paced environment. So there needs to be some process by which you're taking a quick look at that and going, are we still in good shape? Are we going to have cash tomorrow? Or are we going to have a business tomorrow, from the cyber sort of mitigation point of view? Jessica?
Yeah, so I think on this when you're thinking about cyber risk, so try to focus on the business impact, and this is where it really pays to do that thinking, when, not if, that we talked about earlier, because the risk that you need to get to grips with is when you are hit by an attack, what does that do to your business over the period of the attack and afterwards. So you're going to need to think about how quickly could you recover. That's a really, really big piece, because if you can recover,
we're going to cover that in a later slide, I think, on the recovery plan side of things.
Because this is going to affect the size of the business impact, right? The difference between a week and 3 months. And by the way, there are British Library is still recovering. 2 years later, Hackney is still recovering 7 years later. But the point here is that cyber risk, you need to try to quantify it as much as you can. Otherwise, it's very theoretical. The risk is not just, the attacker can come in this way and they're going to compromise this, that, and the other. Yes, I mean, you need to understand that so that you can try to mitigate and patch things up. But you have to understand the risk to your business, which means putting a figure on it.
Yeah.
David, do you have anything to add for this slide?
Yeah, thanks. In regulated sectors, I guess finance, energy, utilities, telecoms, health, cyber posture reporting has become mandatory. Regulators and your customers up the food chain are going to want to see ongoing risk assessments, I guess instant handling measures. The fact that, as this talk is hopefully indicating, cyber needs to be a board level issue for you, and resilience or penetration testing. The new cyber bill kind of generalizes this approach, effectively saying that if your business is important to others and how they function, then cyber is something to be taken seriously. But even if you're not explicitly regulated yourself, your customers are likely to be. They'll want to flow down obligations to you in your contracts. Your insurers are going to want to see that you're adhering to best practice as well.
Yeah.
Next slide, please.
So, I mean, David briefly touched on this, but when we're doing credit control is something you're doing on a monthly basis, and what you're looking for is anomalies and changes in the way in which your customers are operating, and whether or not they're going to be able to pay you or not, and if they are delaying, what are you doing to mitigate that? Again, when you're looking at cyber, it's exactly the same thing. There needs to be a continuous process of looking for anomalies in your systems. So this is the kind of thing where you can start thinking about the questions to ask your MSP or your head of IT and security. What have we got in place to look for changes? Because not every attack is successful, right? There's a lot of evidence that comes out that looks, these automated bots that are out there that these people tend to use to sort of initiate first line of attack. They will leave behind signs that they made an attempt that you successfully repelled. And if you see those anomalies, then perhaps changes in those attacks and how they're being repelled, because they will change their behavior. So you might need to be anticipating that change of behavior. So asking your MSP or your IT security team, what are you doing to track this? What's the trend that's going on? What's the anomalies that we're seeing, and is it getting worse or better? Are we changing things to mitigate those issues? So in the same way you're looking after credit control, you need to be asking those kinds of questions of that department or those people inside your organization. Jessica?
Yeah, I don't really have much to add.
David?
I think that when it comes to post-breach response, this question becomes even more relevant. And I guess customers, regulators, insurers are going to ask, were you monitoring systems the way that a reasonable and responsible business would? I think references to anomaly detection, escalations management, logging retention, as you said, Jeff, review processes being documented. I think that if you can show cyber hygiene best practice, it puts you in a good place in terms of credibility to the wider market, as well as to people that are going to be giving you the cash that you're referencing here as well.
Yep. Anything to add, Sam?
I was just going to add that time is of the essence in all of this. The sooner you can identify that something is going wrong and those anomalies, the sooner you can do something about it. But also ask the difficult questions, know where your vulnerabilities and your weaknesses are, because then you can manage those risks. And a lot of the organizations we speak to would rather bury their head in the sand than know where their vulnerabilities were, because that leads to difficult conversations.
Yeah, that's what boards are for, right? Difficult conversations. Next slide. So this is the last of our discussion around the cash management corollary, but it leads to something that Jessica referred to earlier. When you're doing your planning around your cash, one of the things you're doing is forecasting. You're looking forward. You're saying, this is how we're going to run our business. This is how we're going to fund our business. This is how we're going to keep our business going. What are we going to do if that changes? What are our mitigation plans around that? Do we have, assets we can sell? Do we have a line of credit with the bank? You're preparing those things ahead of time because right, cash flow changes. It's something you can't control, absolutely. And that's the same with the cyber. So in the cyber world, the very first thing that one of the first things you need to do once you've actually got your defense mechanisms up and you've mitigated is address the when, right? Because it's going to happen. And prepare a response plan. And I think the easiest one to think about, rather than worry about all the digital, technological, how do we get out of this mess kind of stuff, is very simple. How can I run my business without my digital assets? Because no matter what happens when a cyber attack occurs, you will have to run your business at some level, obviously a reduced level, without access to certain data, that's online, access to your cloud services, access to your IT capability, access to your PCs. And are you ready for that? Do you have a printout of all the phone numbers of the businesses that you need to talk to? Do you have the ability to continue talking to suppliers and customers, right? Just very simple stuff to just live and sustain while the experts like Sam and others are helping you get out of the problem that you're in, because it's going to happen at some point. And just being ready with that. What do I do when I haven't got my cash? What do I do when I haven't got my digital services? And how do I sustain myself to a recovery point? That's a key part of what you need to have and in your cyber planning processes. Jessica?
Yeah. Are you going to be able to pay salaries?
Yeah.
What, if any, of your customer services are you going to be able to continue to deliver? That's really, really important, because if your income collapses overnight, in fact, actually, your cyber issues are going to become cash issues very, very quickly. So actually, the cash corollary is actually very relevant here. So this is why I say it's so important to try to put a figure on your exposure. And it is going to come down to, yes, I mean, literally, how long can you go, without access to those services, without and the affected knock to income.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we
Yeah.
started with Sam giving us a very clear financial picture of the consequence of being attacked here in the Southwest, because those numbers of what industry you're in, the likelihood of attack, how often you're likely to get attacked, and the average cost of those attacks, you can use that to give yourself a ballpark idea of what's going to happen to your business. Bearing in mind those costs that Sam highlighted were really just the immediate costs. They weren't your consequential costs, which are n times higher than that, by the way. Sam, you might want to comment on that as we're coming back to the risk thing and the financial.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Jeff said, those figures I gave at the start are sort of the reflection that reporting. You can definitely times it by n. Preparing your cyber response plan is vital for all organizations, sectors and sizes. It doesn't matter, because it's not just, are you under cyber attack, but if one of your main suppliers goes down, we've seen again in the news recently, big software providers having outages, and how do you continue to run your business when that's not available? If you do suffer a cyber incident, you can report into policing. As I've said, we have a digital forensics team. We can come down, we can help investigate what happened, help you understand how it happened so that you can close those loopholes, rebuild your resilience, and hopefully stop it happening again. What we can't do is rebuild your systems for you, so you do need to have a plan in place for that as well. Thank you.
David?
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Sam, as well. After an incident, this is a time for me and my team really to kind of shine and really make a difference to our clients, and that's why I, as a lawyer, it sounds perverse, but quite enjoy this side of things. There's a lot of crisis management here, but lawyers are useful in this situation because we can act to preserve legal privilege. So as Sam said, you might need to get a IT forensics person in to work out what's happened, what data's been affected, someone else to come and remediate the issue, someone to get yourself back online. If you have a law firm instruct those organizations on your behalf, then it means that any information they give to us and we give to you is protected by legal privilege, which would ensure that those investigation reports, forensic findings, internal communications remain protected as far as possible should any kind of court claims or regulatory investigations come to pass. We'll also manage regulators for you, liaise with the ICO, sector bodies, the FCA a few times, any new authorities might be mandated under the new cyber bill. We can also manage contractual exposure. So if you've had a data incident, you're very likely in breach of a number of customer contracts, maybe supply contracts. We can help you identify those risk issues, work out what you need to do, work out how to report, who you need to report. If it's going to the press, we can manage, deal with PR agencies on your behalf as well. Deal with communications to affected customers and individuals, and any kind of reputational or liability fallout I guess you might suffer from an issue. We can't, as lawyers, repair your systems or replace technical remediation, but we can ensure that the narrative and the communications that go out to the market, your customers and regulators, are considered careful and have minimal impact in terms of liability for you.
Thank you. Next slide.
So we're coming to the end of the panel discussion, really. So if you've got questions, please do fire them into the Q&A section. But just to summarise, I mean, hopefully we've helped to lower the barriers to understanding how to mitigate risk from cyber in your business. So cash and cyber demand the same sort of things from your leadership board, for governance, that type of thing. And you can use your implicit knowledge of the cash management systems to guide your explicit plans around cyber. That's the aim of today, to just sort of get you to realise how important it is, obviously, about how you start looking at it from a board perspective. Thank you to the panel initially. Right, we are open for Q&A. So is anybody in the audience, if you'd like to either raise your hand or if you want to pop any questions into the Q&A box, and we'll do what we can to get through. Yeah, the copies of the slides will be available afterwards, and the session as a recording as well will get sent out.
Yep.
While we're waiting for a few questions, Jeff, was there anything else you wanted to add about the session? Or
there's some people put their hand up. Jules, I think.
Yes, sorry, just a quick one. So I sit on a board. We've had an external review done, which is great, but they've mentioned about managed detection and response, but it's comes at quite a high price tag. I wonder if you've got any views on the value of that.
Depends what your current posture is versus the size of your business and the risk to your business. So the value question is really a balancing question of risk and exposure. So I think, you know, that would be my first comment. So Tori can't give you an instant answer on that, except to say it's a matter of when, not if. So you know it's a risk you've got to mitigate. You just need to understand the level of risk.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks for that.
I'd like to be able to add more, but Jessica, you might have perspective on that.
How big is your organisation?
So it's about 90 million turnover, but the managed detection and risk is it's sort of using an external agency to help review, but they're a price tag of around 65k. Okay,
so 90 million turnover. So you've a substantial business then at risk, and I'm guessing you've got quite a relatively quite a lot of employees. I'm guessing. Don't know what sector you're in. Yeah. Okay, so managed detection and response. So it's essentially an outsourced security monitoring service. Really common thing to have for medium to large organisations. 65k doesn't seem to me to be a massive price tag. I mean, well, yeah. I mean, okay. We'd all rather not spend 65k, I guess, if we don't absolutely have to. What's your thinking on why you might not need it? Is there something about your business that it's?
No, it's just something new that we hadn't really picked up as a board. Managed detection and response. It was a new area that we hadn't really come across. We've got lots of internal stuff, but it was the you know, sort of the value you mentioned earlier on around how there wasn't regulation for the managed service providers, whether the managed detection and response area was any better.
Yeah, well, so I mean, this is essentially it's an outsourced security service. So what they're doing is that they are monitoring all of the traffic coming across your systems to look for anomalous patterns to give you early warning of a potential intrusion. So that's really useful. So if you look at this this colourful picture on the slide in front of us here is the NIST cybersecurity framework, which tells us all of the things that an organisation should need to be able to do to protect itself against cyber risk. One of the planks here is detect, which is basically detecting intrusions and attacks. We need to be able to know that it's happening. Otherwise, how are we can even know to sort of trigger our incident plan? You know, we'd rather get a bit of early warning before we get the ransomware demand. So that's what managed detection and response does. The alternative to getting a managed service is to do it yourself. Is to go and buy a product and have your team implement it itself. So that's the alternative. So that's sort of something to think about. Could I don't know anything about the size or capability of your internal tech function, but that's the alternative. The other alternative is not to do it at all. It feels to me like a business with 90 million turnover. If you can afford to do it, I don't know why you wouldn't.
So to give you a sort of worked example of an organisation that hadn't been previously significantly impacted, very large, multi-billion pound company, and they had before the attack a team of about 35 people in their cyber organisation inside their company, and that was clearly thought to be sufficient. After the attack and the impact on their business, and I'm not going to name names, although it is in the public domain, after their attack and after they accounted for just the direct cost, not the reputational impact, not the lost sales, lost business, but just the cost of recovery, they increased the size of their cyber team from 35 to 350 over the course of another couple of years, because they now understood the risk. So I guess it comes back down to that, you know, do you have an appropriately balanced perspective on the risk to your business and the need to invest in protecting your business? And I can't answer that question, but that's clearly where you need to look. But it is very, very common for businesses to not have that clear perspective, to have a kind of "it won't happen to me" perspective, or it can't be that bad. And the businesses that are out there that have been impacted, that either folded or have managed to recover, put significantly more money in later than they had before. And this one was 10x, but it can vary a lot.
My very quick input, Jules, would be how much it's going to cost you if you can't do anything with your IT for a day. And if that's obviously a day for an outage is very short term. If you do have an incident, it's likely to be significantly longer than that just to get up and running, let alone managing the tail. So I think you need to balance that cost, those potential costs, against that £65,000 quote. That would be my advice.
Thanks very much.
I think there was another question.
I think that's me. I'm next. I've got the question. It was mostly to David and Jessica, really, about the regulatory cyber bill, when you anticipate that coming in. A bit more background to it, please.
So, okay, so it was introduced to Parliament last week. So, assuming it doesn't get hijacked for other purposes, my best guess is that it would get passed at some point next year. And then it will take several years, unfortunately, for everything within it to kind of work through the system. So I wouldn't, unfortunately, I would not expect it to start affecting organisations in terms of you have to comply with this now, before 2027 at the absolute earliest. What I would hope to see is that those businesses would get well in front of it, because actually most of the organisations that are going to be covered by it are going to be in the tech sector. So the companies who are brought into scope for the first time are going to be managed service providers, data centre providers. The third category are critical suppliers to operators of essential infrastructure. So that means essentially anyone who's covered by the regulations today, which is health, water, electricity, transport, all of those kind